there is going to be enormous disruption, but it is a mistake to assume that that disruption will be long lasting, or also that that disruption won't be accompanied by tremendous growths in productivity, creativity, health, autonomy, and happiness. And I don't mean to downplay the AI safety concerns. I think they're real, but the opportunity here to actually touch people's lives in the areas that I'm talking about, science, engineering, even beyond healthcare, they really eclipse what has come today in the language world.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI Labs, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Vik Bajaj as our guest. As CEO and co-founder of Foresite Labs and interim president of Xaira, Vik brings a unique perspective from the intersection of AI and life sciences. With his background as an associate professor of radiology at Stanford and former roles at Google, Grail, and Verily, Vik has fascinating insights on how AI will transform drug discovery and personalized medicine. If you're interested in understanding how genetic data and AI could predict disease before symptoms appear, and why protein design represents the most advanced application of AI in biology, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI Labs, along with the new legal AI platform Clause, for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to Vik today. Let's get to it. All right, Vik, welcome to the Shift AI podcast. I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, I want to dive in and just talk about your background a little bit. You're going to kind of fill in, some of the gaps, but you have a long history in the life sciences space, and both on the investor side and on the operator side. You were the associate professor of radiology at Stanford. Before that, you were with Grail, which is doing some really interesting things in the cancer space. Before that, at UC Berkeley, Verily was another company that you were involved in. And now, you're the CEO and co-founder of Foresite Labs, involved as the director and interim president at Xaira. What did I miss? I know there's a lot of other stuff you're advising on and investing in, but generally speaking, can you share with the audience a little bit about your background and fill in some of the gaps?
I think you recite the background. It makes it seem like I have planned or designed these things, but honestly, I've just been driven by a combination of scientific curiosity and a desire to apply that curiosity to things that matter to people. And my curiosity, from the time I was an undergraduate and certainly in graduate school, was always at the interface of disciplines, where different ways of thinking combined to result in a productive re-examination of all that came before. In my early career, I worked as much on physics as structural biology, and continued that in my independent academic career and the work that I started at Google. So I've always been fortunate to work at the interface of things that are deeply quantitative, like physics, that are very deeply theory-driven even, and apply them to things that are more descriptive, more empirical, to try to change how those things work. And there's certainly nothing that's more empirical than the life sciences and drug discovery and drug development and healthcare delivery, even more so. That's changing. We're at the vanguard of a revolution that would change that. But it's actually the tools of physics in direct and indirect ways that are responsible for that change.
Remind me the role at Google and what you were doing there.
So I was an academic at Berkeley and the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is just a magical place and a magical environment, speaking of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary science. And all of the things that I was doing, I became convinced that the most impactful, the most revolutionary scientific tools of my generation of scientists, that there were things that Google was developing for purposes completely unrelated to science, for consumer technologies, for modeling individual preferences, for machine learning in the internet context. And I had been talking to people at Google for some time, and eventually decided that pull was simply too irresistible. As scientists, I've often remarked, it's not just new tools; they're not just instruments to get data and to answer questions, but actually even the questions that you ask, they begin to be limited, to be circumscribed in profound ways by the tools that you have available to answer those questions. And so new generations of scientific tools, a new toolkit, um, results in an enormous amount of new discovery and new technology. And when I looked at the world of AI at that point, and by the way, it was far from where it is today, it seemed to me like almost the early days of quantum mechanics, where there was a theory so revolutionary that undergraduates were publishing papers that we still cite today as really revelatory about the natural world. And it's that excitement which I think has been justified. If anything, the excitement is greater today, and the level of validation behind that sort of grandiose notion that AI is going to transform the world of science and engineering. If anything, it's more valid today. Even the promise is greater today than it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And how about
So
the
I felt
interim?
pretty, oh,
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead. No, please.
Yes, I felt pretty happy with that decision, though it was hard to leave academia. I learned a tremendous amount from working at Google and made lifelong friendships there and lifelong professional interactions, which have been quite formative.
How about the interim director or interim president and director at Xaira? Like, for us, and I'm here in Seattle, you're in the Bay Area, but what's happening with that company and the valuation and the connection to the University of Washington is so powerful in this city. And how did you get involved in that?
So the company Xaira is very much grounded in David Baker's work, in the sense that David Baker's work is the most advanced, sustained set of developments in the field of protein design. And I would argue the component of AI relevant to drug discovery that's most advanced, most ready for application, and is really driving, frankly, uncanny results in not just Xaira's portfolio, but in the hands of many other companies that have been founded by David Baker or even inspired indirectly by his work, right? But the aim in assembling Xaira was to do something a little different than we've seen in machine learning companies, at least in biology before. This is more routine in the technology world, which is that we wanted to create a company which wasn't developing a sliver of a product, but really looks at the whole product development process, which in drug discovery is very cumbersome, very error prone, in the sense that we don't have models which can predict the ultimate outcome very well, or we have very few that work well. And so that whole process, which is empirical and requires exhaustive search of different spaces and laborious tests of every concept, there's a rich emerging AI toolkit which will accelerate every step. The vanguard of that is the work that David Baker did, but there are other components as well, because making a drug against a difficult target, that is a accelerant, especially if the drug has very good properties in silico that you can predict in silico. But as important is understanding the next step. What's the patient population that's most likely to respond to that drug? How can you choose that population? And the first step, how do you decide to begin with that a target of your drug is actually the right one or right set of targets, which ideally will cure the disease, not just alleviate the symptoms, and by cure, even reverse the accumulated damage of a disease process? These are very difficult questions to answer because our ability to predict what happens in the milieu of the complex human organism, its biology, is still very weak. And we have a lot of strong reasons to believe that machine learning of various forms will impact that dramatically.
Let's stay with this because I think when I talk to folks, futurists and technologists about the promise of AI, the promise of ML, the optimists always cite biology and life sciences, cure of diseases. There's a future where, yeah, we're going to see some job loss, but we're also going to see this amazing disease curing function, and life is going to be a lot better. paint for the audience in an optimistic view what that future could look like, given where we are right now, what you guys have already learned. What is going to be the low-hanging fruit, and what's the stuff that's far out there in the distance?
So I am an optimist, as you correctly assume, but I'm a realist about that. Unfortunately, part of the reason to be so optimistic that this toolkit will impact drug discovery profoundly is just the remarkable fact that we have this whole product development apparatus and a supporting set of companies and networks and venture capital firms to really support it when the success rate is so profoundly low. There are about 2 million people globally in one way or another who are contributing to drug development and drug discovery. They come to work after studying for 4 to 8 years in school with the sole mission of really alleviating the human suffering of disease. And most of them will be lucky to be involved in one or two things that succeed in the lifetime of their whole careers. And that would be a good career, right? And so we keep doing that and struggling against the unknowable elements of human biology because the rewards are so profound in the sense of alleviating the suffering of really difficult, intractable illnesses. And the truth is that if you can increase the probability of success of different steps of that process by 10%, 20% here and there, you will have transformed both the outcome, but also the economics of drug discovery. So one reason that people are optimistic, and I am, is paradoxically the baseline from where we're beginning is not as great as the public assumes, right? So take the idea that we understand disease biology, and I'll come to why we believe that machine learning and other things can help with this. But there was a time, it's still the case, that many drugs fail in late stage clinical trials. So you go through the whole process of selecting a target, making a drug, whatever the chemical matter is against that target, proving that it has a biological effect which is consistent with your theory of how that target operates in a disease process, in cells, in animal model systems. Then you test it in human beings to understand, is it safe? And if it's safe, then you must do a pivotal trial to test, does it actually work? And that is very expensive because you perform those tests on a large number of human beings, because you have to watch enough differences between a population that is on your drug and the population that is not on your drug and on some other kind of treatment or placebo. And that requires large, expensive studies. Well, the number of drugs that fail in that pivotal step of demonstrating efficacy is very large. And that means that the integrated investment to get to that point is entirely lost. The investment of time, the investment of money, the investment of years of productivity in it. And of course, that patients are waiting for a treatment that doesn't emerge. And that's a remarkable fact that we keep doing that over and over again empirically. Well, over the last decade, principally, since the advent of affordable technologies to understand the genetic basis of human diseases, which we understand by looking at how each individual's genetic code is slightly different. And if we do that over millions of people, then we have a data set where the natural experiments of nature, of evolution, the things that make you and me different, that are somewhat randomized, but they are tantamount to an experiment when observed in millions of people. And we can understand which genes, as a result of these natural experiments, are causing a susceptibility to a disease. And that kind of causal information, that the product of a gene is actually causing a disease, is so valuable that it increases the probability of success between 2 to 3 times of a target that's selected that way. So that is a form of very large data, observational data on human beings, a special kind of data of genetics that doesn't require machine learning to interpret, but is an example of something that really has already revolutionized the drug discovery and drug development process. There's a potential that machine learning could take us beyond that, beyond what results from passive observations of human nature and into models that are much more informed in the laboratory by experiments that are under human control. And Xaira is among the companies and academic institutions that are doing that.
And so when that happens and you're able to compute at much higher levels and look at data in a much more comprehensive way, that's the unlock. Is that the unlock for a lot of the things that have been sticking us in the past?
It depends on what point in time you're asking the question. So maybe it's worth making a prediction, and I don't know if I'm on firm ground in doing that, but I would predict that the first thing that will happen is that this kind of genetic information, which already exists, there are few practitioners of that who do it really well in industry. Well, I'd like to think that we do it well, but if you want to list someone who does it very well, it's Regeneron and the Regeneron Genetics Center. But targets of that sort that have that strong evidence, now the next step is drugging them. And some targets are very difficult to drug. That is where the genius of David Baker and his group comes in. They're going to open up to the drug discovery toolkit for the first time a whole family of targets for which there is very good evidence biologically of their involvement in disease, but we just don't have the toolkit to easily drug them effectively. And there's other things in that category too that are not just genetically driven, but I'm just citing that as an example. So I think the first thing that you're going to see is that kind of work results in drugs that are more precise, drugs that are developed more quickly, drugs that have better properties, and that they're able to engage targets that before you couldn't do empirically, because empirical processes require somehow manipulating biology to produce the drug, right? So that will be first. I would suggest that after that, understanding clinical populations where those drugs will respond, they'll be more effective. And by the way, if they're more effective that way, they're also more cost effective for the system. So there's a really, double importance of that. That's happened in oncology already. In 20 years, we've gone from testing essentially poisons that kill tumor cells faster than they kill the healthy cells of the body or in greater numbers, to drugs which are targeted against the very rearrangements, the genetic rearrangements that are driving an individual's cancer in the first place. Imagine being able to do that for all of disease. So that will be the next step, I would predict. And the third step is just this deeper understanding of disease biology, where we can't actually predict what is happening. You look at genetics, you're born with genetics. You're looking at a lifetime exposure. Now, disease is a complex gene environment interaction, and we don't have models that predict that effectively. If we build up those models, then the targets that we choose will be that much more informed by a predictive understanding of biology. We'd be turning biology into something more like physics, maybe someday more like engineering, but something where there's a predictive model behind it. And then finally, none of this reflects modern machine learning thinking, by the way, right? Machine learning thinking in the modern pure sense is general and forces you to consider the most general problem possible. And the steps, as I've outlined them today, they reflect the product development process as it exists today, but it's not a priori how you would define the product development process. So a broader question, maybe the fourth thing that will emerge, is how do you integrate in machine learning models over all the information that we have about human biology? That includes what's in the literature. You see tremendous activity there from the frontier model companies, including with Google's scientific co-pilots and work that all of the companies are doing. But how do you integrate over all of that knowledge? Models of biology that you develop through laboratory data, human genetics and other molecular observational data, and even then what you are doing to produce protein drugs or small molecule drugs that disturb that biology in a productive way. Ultimately, those things would be unified by, machine learning models of biology. And I know that sounds grandiose, but if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, and I claimed that the entire legal profession could be upended by models that at least are pre-trained. They're not, fully trained this way, but they're pre-trained on random data from the internet. You would say that's an extraordinary claim, right? But today, it's not an extraordinary claim. And I think over the next few years, though data is slower to emerge in biology, that's the direction in which the field is heading.
I want to take a minute and talk about today's sponsor, the Clause AI platform. If you're on a revenue team, you know the frustration. Deals stalling in legal review, contracts sitting in queues, quarter end crunches that feel chaotic. And if you're in house legal, you're feeling the pressure from the other side. Business wants deals done yesterday, leadership wants airtight risk management, and your team is already maxed out. Well, here's the thing, this isn't a legal problem or a business problem. It's a collaboration problem, and that's exactly what the Clause AI platform solves. They've built an AI platform specifically for enterprise legal and revenue operations, contract review, deal acceleration, policy management, workflow optimization. But here's what makes it different. It's designed to bring legal and revenue teams onto the same page, working together. Legal becomes an enabler of speed, not a blocker. And business teams get the velocity they need without cutting corners on risk. So whether you're in legal ops trying to scale your impact, or you're on the revenue side trying to close deals faster without the constant back and forth, check out Clause. Go to clause.so. That's CLAUSE.so and schedule a conversation with their team. And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. Let's talk a little bit more about the cost implications, because right now it's a very complicated thing, especially in the United States. And do you think that AI and ML is going to have an impact on the way that we are able to pay for our care and our drugs?
I do. And I think the way that you phrase the question is really important, right? Because sometimes in the biotech world, we live in this kind of rarefied scientific air. We're in an envelope of almost quasi-academia, right? And that's not how everyone sees what we do. They don't divorce what we do from the overall quagmire that is the US healthcare system. And the promise of AI in healthcare is to really fundamentally change the quality and the level of personalization of healthcare in ways that foundationally affect the doctor-patient relationship. So to me, I mean, you'll have many points of view on this. There's an enormous number of profitable companies that are doing things at the periphery of the healthcare system that are really vexing, annoying parts of healthcare, billing and scheduling appointments and medical scribes, and all of that is deeply important and is non-healthcare. So replacing non-healthcare with more efficient ways of doing things, that's happening already, and that will be important, but not transformational. There's another kind of transformational step, which the beginnings of which start in radiology and anything involving images. Is work that we started at Google more than a decade ago now, revealed that there is such a latent information content in medical imaging. It's amazing. I mean, did you know that from images of the retina, not only can you detect diabetic retinopathy, which is a leading cause of completely preventable blindness, but the retina, for reasons that are not scientifically obvious, is a window into renal risk, into cardiovascular risk, into all kinds of risks that are elucidated by machine learning algorithms trained on outcomes data or disease incidence data and those images. And there's similarly latent information content in complicated images like whole body MRIs or brain MRIs, but also something simple like a chest X-ray. Believe it or not, a chest X-ray can be used to produce a very reliable picture of 5-year all-cause mortality. And you would not think so, but it points to the latent information content in data that is collected for completely specific purposes in the medical system. So the real step will be tools that harness all that information and maybe take a little bit more information about you. And I'll come to some examples of what that is if you'd like. And then change healthcare from something where you measure facts about a population of 1 million people. Some have high cholesterol, some have low cholesterol, so you treat them differently. Well, that is extraordinarily valuable. But the next evolution of that thinking is to actually understand rigorously the scientific differences between you and me, our disease predispositions, our health states, and then design in an automated way a standard of care which is tailored to the unique risks and preferences even of the individual. There's a huge appetite, consumer appetite for this in the world today. People spend so much money on things which frankly are largely snake oil. They do not keep you healthy. But the delta now between what we understand scientifically about disease and disease progression and what is actually put into clinical practice, that difference is just a function of the tooling that we have to synthesize, automate, present these data and make them useful to people to take advantage of them, to take control of their own health, and to physicians who are overworked and have no way, unless you go to an expensive concierge practice, to process something like a genetic test that tells you about your predisposition to 50 diseases. So a whole new world is emerging. It's not as simple as the tech AI proponents think that it will be, nor is it anywhere close to as dangerous as the more conservative medical groups think that it will be. It's a world in which this toolkit, along with new science and new ideas, will be harnessed for the first time with no latency to the benefit of the patient. And that has the power to really transform the cost of care and the pleasure of the doctor-patient experience. And I don't mean to sound like my colleagues in the HHS right now, but actually people are interested in staying healthy and not taking a drug to reverse the effects of some disease well after the damage is done. And we have the science and technology to deliver that today.
It makes me think of a lot of people that I know that are already very interested in what their future health is going to look like. And a lot of doctors in our current system that just say, well, it's better just to wait for the symptoms. But I know a lot of people that are spending a lot of money to try to find out what that's going to look like. And if we can get the cost down of those tests or use AI to be able to look at existing tests that aren't expensive and find more information, I think there's going to be a huge consumer appetite for that.
Absolutely. There already is, and we don't offer consumers these services. I mean, did you know, take genetics alone, right? And genetics were just the tip of the iceberg. There's all kinds of other measurements, including proteomics that are emerging, but just take genetics. It used to be 5 years ago that even in the hands of advanced researchers, if you gave an unselected population, just everyone in a room, a genetic test, fewer than 1% would receive something actionable, meaning that it would actually change your health outcomes. But now from these millions of data points in individuals that I mentioned before, we are able to use machine learning approaches and simpler statistical approaches to understand not how one gene that's very rare, how does that contribute to a disease, but how do multiple mutations that on their own are benign pile up, add up, interact even in a nonlinear sense to create a disease predisposition. And that problem, which is now solvable and has been solved by many, many groups, it now allows you to determine an individual's lifetime risk of more than 50 diseases in a way that is portable across ancestries and ethnicities and in a way that's actionable. If I know that you are at high risk of cardiovascular disease, then I would treat you more aggressively with a statin, maybe even in your 30s, because the side effects are so modest, right? If I know that you're at a high risk for particular cancers, then not only would we screen you more often for those cancers, but a positive looking test that otherwise might be dismissed as only suspicious would then be attached to a greater level of suspicion. Or now neurodegenerative disease, there are really validated lifestyle interventions which prevent the onslaught of neurodegenerative disease. So if you add those all up, it's now at the point where 75% of people with receiving a simple $10 to $20 genetic test of this kind would receive something that profoundly changes their care, impacts their lives before the onset of disease, which is everything that we've always talked about. And by the way, we're not doing that in the US. It is interesting and ironic that the country that produces much of the world's data is the United Kingdom. And the country where these concepts are being tried first at scale is the United Kingdom. In spite of the financial condition of the NHS, the UK continues to innovate and continues to try to bring these kinds of concepts forward in its large national healthcare system. I'm on the board of Genomics England, which is a UK government affiliated body that works on some of this. And it's amazing to see the appetite that politicians and scientists in the UK and clinicians have mustered and sustained for this kind of activity. And hopefully that will happen in the US as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's ironic. Well, tell me a little bit more about Foresite Labs and, kind of outline what the mission is. And also, what are some of the other companies that you are associated with through Foresite Labs that we should be learning about and talking about?
Foresite Labs, in a sense, is a continuation of some of the work that I started at Google more than a decade ago. And what we really specialize in, of course, is AI, but not in a generic sense. We're scientists and engineers, and our interests lie in harnessing AI and developing AI toolkit, which includes both data and algorithms and product development processes for the things that matter most. And those are all things that touch science and engineering. How do we discover, develop, build, manufacture? How do we imagine product development in a world that rests much less on empirical processes and much more on predictive potential, much more on a artificial intelligence which can be specialized in a different industry? And that is all we work on. We don't work on consumer technologies, consumer AI. We work on things that require an understanding of physics, an understanding of science, an understanding of engineering. That includes in the life sciences, Xaira being a great example. Mark Tessier-Levine, the CEO at Xaira, has built an amazing team that spans all three of the areas that I mentioned and also touches on the fourth, which is long-term research that would link them all together in a very unique way. And that team is very amazing in also its cultural unification, right, of all of the different, somewhat contradictory cultures that have to come together to produce a product. But that's a feature in any of these conservative industries. Some of these industries have 100 or 200-year-old traditions of how you do things. And now we are coming into them with an idea to upend them with AI. And you cannot approach that with hubris, but you have to approach it with a humility that's driven from an understanding of how people work and what people want. And that's true in the life sciences and healthcare. It's true in aerospace. It's true in all intersections of the material real world with AI. And in short, that's what we specialize in, and that's what we do well.
Yeah, it seems like, especially in healthcare, the how complicated those systems are and how regulated. I mean, it makes it really, really challenging. And you can see why, in some ways, AI going after software engineers is a lot easier to do that first. Maybe that's why we're seeing some of that work being done in that space. As we look into the future, tell me some of the things that you're the most excited about, and maybe go out on a limb a little bit and make some predictions. We won't hold you to it, but knowing what you know and seeing the businesses that you've seen, what are some of the things that excite you the most about our future?
Well, you mentioned software engineering, and there are perhaps reasons why AI has become useful in software engineering so quickly. And we should talk about them because they relate to how it might become useful in other industries and what's generalizable and what isn't. So one thing is that software is like a language. We have spent a large amount of time as a field coming up with machine learning architectures that turn discrete things like language into more continuous looking things. from which you can calculate directions and optimizations and other features that require a universal representation, right? So that's one reason there's been a lot of time and effort spent on understanding that. Code is special because there's an enormous amount of code repositories available. In a sense, they're probably self-supervised in that you have a whole history of code and a documentation of what its purpose is. And then you can execute a block of code and see if it works. So there's a number of reasons why coding is sort of tied up with reasoning and how these models reason that stretch from the architecture to the available data to how you reinforce that training in a particular context that is sort of almost ideal, right, for AI the way that it's built today. And it's one of the reasons I would say today a software engineer in India can be as creative, as productive, as effective as anyone in the US, but for his contacts with the industry. And so there's been a democratization of software engineering that I think we'll also see reflected in the US economy as a whole. And that is a short, compact, instructive journey, right? But if we talk about this in other areas that we care about, engineering, design, scientific discovery, life sciences, healthcare, it's harder because one, all the things that I mentioned in an abstract sense, the data that are relevant for them, the physical phenomena that are relevant for them, they exist in multiple length scales. They resist a mapping that is as smooth from the discrete spaces in which they exist to any continuous spaces in which you can calculate functions and develop models. There are approaches to do all of this, but it is not as well studied or simple. Second, most of the time, the data to do all of this, it doesn't just exist on the internet. There's no body of human knowledge that's sufficiently large that all of that is just captured, right? I was remarking to someone today that this is actually a very old trajectory. It was first the librarians at the Library of Alexandria that understood that the economy was not just in the ships that were trading goods, but actually in the knowledge that was contained when they arrived with scrolls from all over the world, and those were copied and centralized. In a sense, we're continuing that. So there's very few things like that in science. By the way, the protein data bank on which all of this is based is David Baker's work and the work at DeepMind. That's an example, but an exception. So all across the spaces of science and engineering, life sciences and healthcare, getting the data is also difficult. So there's architectures, there's data, and then the product development processes. You don't just release a product and it becomes viral. You have to build something or make a drug or do something. So those are the reasons why these things are slower to emerge in other industries. But I think in all of the industries that I just mentioned, they will emerge, and they are.
Well, I always like to end the show with the same question, so I'll give the same question to you. And it's when you think about our future with AI, future of society, future of work, I want you to try to describe it in two words only, but then you can elaborate on those two words.
I think the metaphor that comes to mind, two words, is industrial revolution. If you ask me quickly, in the sense that there is going to be enormous disruption, but it is a mistake to assume that that disruption will be long lasting, or also that disruption won't be accompanied by tremendous growths in productivity, creativity, health, autonomy, and happiness. And I don't mean to downplay the AI safety concerns. I think they're real. But the opportunity here to actually touch people's lives in the areas that I'm talking about, science, engineering, even beyond healthcare, they really eclipse what has come today in the language world. There are so many opportunities, so many ways in which we can upend things that are not productive, deliver things that people want that are impactful in their lives more quickly, more productively. So I just see a very bright future in spite of the disruption. And I think that the safety concerns are always there, but I think that they will be eclipsed by technological controls, and they will be, also the benefits we'll see pretty quickly far outweigh any of the harms.
Well, I really appreciate your optimism. And this is one of those subjects that I think it's very, very clear that there's going to be some big advancements that happen because of both AI and ML, but then in the future, quantum computing. And these are things that we don't really understand yet. But I tend to agree with you. I think there's going to be some really amazing outcomes, and I hope that that we're going to benefit from them greatly. So, Vik, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's just fascinating talking with you, and we're going to keep an eye out on all the developments that you are making at Foresite Labs and with all the companies that you're involved in. So, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Bo. It's very nice to meet you, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Vik as our guest on today's episode. His insights into the potential for AI to transform not just drug discovery, but the entire healthcare system gives us a compelling vision of what's possible. From his work at Xaira using David Baker's protein design breakthroughs to his broader vision of AI democratizing access to personalized medicine, Vik offers a grounded view of how scientific rigor, combined with AI, could address some of humanity's most pressing health challenges. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Augmented Edge newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI Labs and Claws. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel, and the show is produced by Crumpled Ink Media.